In this lesson, we'll learn about the concept of causation and how our understanding of what it means for A to cause B, how that understanding can help us design experiments. Now, we've learned in a previous lesson on correlation that there are three ways to explain a correlation. So if A and B are correlated, it could be storks and people, or foot size and reading level, or fat intake and cancer, or income inequality and trust levels. If two things are correlated, we could explain that correlation in one of three ways. A causes B, B causes A, or C causes A and B. In this lesson, we'll try to figure out what do we exactly mean when we say A causes B. What do we mean by the concept of causation? Okay, in this slide then you see our working definition of what it means for A to cause B. Notice there's three parts to it, so it's fairly involved. But I think you'll see intuitively what we mean here. The first point here says A must come before B, right? So the cause has to come before the effect. That's point number one. The second point says if A did not happen, B would not have happened, all other things being the same. Right? So if A causes B, if A doesn't happen, then B shouldn't happen. Now, it's true, there might be other things that can also cause B, but we're focusing on this relationship between A and B, not other things that might cause B. So if A did not happen, B would not happen. And finally, the third point here, if A and B are not currently happening, and then we supply A, we supply the cause, then we should get the effect B, all other things being the same. So this is going to be our definition of what it means to say that A causes B. And as we'll see coming up here, this set of definitions here, or these 3 points, will help us design experiments to test hypotheses. So here now we'll have to recall what a hypothesis is. Recall that a hypothesis is a first attempt at an explanation. And so remember, since explanations give the cause of things, a hypothesis is going to be something like A causes B. And there are lots of different fancy ways hypotheses might be stated, but usually they capture something about something's causing something else in the world. In the case of our frogs, we said parasites cause deformities. Notice over here the picture of the frog here, and these little black dots here are parasites, suspiciously at precisely the location where there's a deformity, a missing leg here. So notice then this is a hypothesis because we're attempting to explain something in nature, the appearance of frog deformities, and the hypothesis is a form of an explanation because it's identifying a cause of the deformities. Parasites cause deformities. A causes B. Now we just went through what does it mean to say A causes B, and we had our 3 points up here. A happens first, so the parasites have to be there before any deformities happen, but also then if the parasites were not there, right, you wouldn't get the deformities. And if healthy tadpoles are around and we supply the parasites, then we should get the deformities. Notice then, the very definition of what it means for A to cause B helps us set up experiments. So we're going to use the definition of A causes B to help us design experiments. So one way to test the hypothesis, which is what experiments do, they test hypotheses, is to block A to see if B happens. Right? In addition, we want to supply A to see if B happens. And then we're going to compare the results in those two conditions. Notice, again, if A did not happen, that's the blocking A. And if A and B are not happening, then we supply A. That's the supplying A condition. So we're going to set up two conditions, one that has the A and one that does not have the A, and then we're going to compare them. And this is the power of science. It's the basic strategy in science is to gain control over the variables. We're defining now the variable as the factor of interest, the thing that we think is causing something else. In this case, it would be our A. Right? Now, in the case of the frogs, we saw some results from an experiment that attempted to test the hypothesis that parasites are causing frog deformities. And you recall we have 4 conditions. In one of them, there were no parasites present. And in the other 3 conditions, there were different levels of parasites. And sure enough, we found that in these 3 conditions here that had parasites, we had high rates of frog limb deformities. And in fact, 0 deformities in the condition where there were no parasites. So notice, according to our sort of experimental design here, some of the conditions are ones where you block the parasites, and some are the conditions where you're supplying the parasites, and then we're comparing the results. Now we're going to add some vocabulary to this. When the condition has the variable of interest, the factor of interest, in this case parasites is the thing that we're interested in studying. We want to know whether parasites are causing deformities. So all the conditions that have parasites, we're going to call those the experimental condition. The control condition does not have the variable. And that's going to be an important definition for our experimental groups here. The control condition lacks the variable. The experimental conditions have the variables. And the fact that these three groups here all have high deformities and the control condition has none, this is powerful evidence that parasites are causing deformities. Notice what we're doing in an experiment like this. We are gaining control over the variable. We are purposely setting up conditions, some with the variable, the parasites, some without, and comparing the outcomes. And the results here give us strong evidence that parasites are causing deformities. You'll remember in an earlier study, an observational study, researchers went to the different ponds and simply measured pesticide levels and parasite presence along with frog deformities. And remember, this, we said, was evidence of correlation, but we cannot conclude what's causing what here. We just see a correlation. In other words, for this type of study, we don't have control over the variables. We're simply measuring them. And we find a pattern that in ponds with parasites, you get deformities. In ponds with no parasites, you don't get deformities. And remember, there was no correlation with pesticides. But this is just correlational data. This is an experiment where you're gaining control over the variables, and from an experiment, we can then make conclusions about one thing causing another. In summary, then, the way that we design experiments by having some groups not have the variable and other groups get the variable, that very sort of technique follows from our understanding of what we mean when we say one thing causes another. That if A didn't happen, B wouldn't have happened. And if B's not happening now and we supply A, then that should lead to B. That's exactly what we're doing when we do an experiment and we set up conditions where we can compare the results to make conclusions about the factor of interest, parasites causing deformities.